In our game, we can make the camera move in a much nicer way than just sticking exactly to where the player is. Many games use camera motion in interesting ways to make the gameplay more engaging. I've linked in the tutorials an article by Ite Keren about how cameras work in different games, and the document is here. It's called Scroll Back, the theory and practice of cameras inside scrollers. And it has some great examples of how different cameras work in different games. So we're going to make a new object for the camera, and this object will chase after the player, and it will use physics to smooth the motion of the camera. First, to do this, we need to go and remove the camera from our player script. So we'll go and edit our player controls and find here in our constantly loop, we're constantly centering the camera on myself. We can go ahead and delete, or you could disable it as well. Either one would be fine. And then we can close and save our player controls. Now let's go to our media sidebar and find an object. You could use any object, but we might as well use our little camera icon here so it's obvious what that's for. And our camera controls are now going to be on this object. So let's add a script to it. Now we don't want our camera visible or colliding with anything, so let's grab from events, we want when created, and then from looks, we want set visibility of myself to false, and from physics, we want down the bottom, about in the middle, collisions, set all side collisions to false. We don't want to disable physics, we just want to disable collisions because we do want to use velocity. Okay, now from events, we'll grab our constantly block and we'll then go to looks to center the camera on this object. So that's under camera lock near the bottom, center camera on myself. Now to get this camera to move towards the player, we're going to use a velocity block from physics. Under motion, set velocity X. Now the velocity is not going to be 0, so we can throw that away. We want the velocity to be the difference between the camera and the player. So if the camera is really far away from the player, it's going to quickly chase after the player to speed up. But if the camera is really close to the player, then it's going to hardly move at all. So to get the difference between their two positions, we want a minus block from operators. Starts out as a plus, change that plus to a minus. Now we want this to say X position of the player minus X position of myself. So we'll go to transform and grab X position of myself and duplicate that. But this X position is going to be for the player, so we'll throw myself away. Now we should save the player as a variable when the level starts. So we'll go to events and grab when the level starts. And then go to variables, create a new variable. We'll call this player. And the type will be instance. The player is an instance or an object. And click OK. And then we'll grab set instance player 2, drag that into when the level starts. And we can identify the player based on its tag. So we'll go to sensing and grab first instance by tag, tag name, and the tag is player. And remember, we're doing this when the level starts instead of when created, because all of the objects get created one by one just before the level starts, and it might be the case that the camera exists before the player. And if we tried to identify the player before the player existed, it would break our game. So we want that to happen when the level starts because we know everything exists. Okay, now we want to refer to the player down in here. So we'll go to variables, instance player, set the velocity of the camera to the difference between the player and myself. So now the camera should speed towards the player horizontally. Let's play this to see that happen. And we'll call this camera controls. And there we go. The camera is moving horizontally and it's not locked onto the player. It gently moves towards the player.